Unlike his wavemate compatriots, Jazz, Hot Rod, and Cup, BLURR has been continually passed over whenever it came to update Transformers' most iconic characters. Yes, he received a figure in the 2010 Generations line, as did Cup, but BLURR was relegated to being a rather unconvincing retool of that same line's star debutante Drift, while Cup got his own mold, and Hot Rod and Jazz's previous iterations were still fresh enough to fit in. And this was BLURR's first toy since the original. It wasn't until 2016's Titans Return line that BLURR finally got his moment in the sun, and, well, I actually have a lot of good things to say about that one, at least from an engineering standpoint. Cup, Jazz, and Hot Rod all got their own updates in the Prime Wars trilogy as well, but they still had other options to choose from that weren't shoehorned into whatever gimmick Hasbro were doing that year. Finally, in 2020, which somehow is 2 entire years ago, BLURR gets the treatment he's been denied for oh so long. I'm not sure it was worth it. Welcome to Kit Reviews. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Studio Series Deluxe Class BLURR. This figure was released in 2020 as part of Wave 11 of the Deluxe assortment, and represents BLURR's appearance in the 1986 film The Transformers: The Movie. BLURR's alternate mode is a retro-futuristic hover car, cast entirely in 2 shades of blue. Its shape is very reminiscent of the form scantily seen in the original film, very flat and sleek like a robotic magic carpet. While it's not clear that this is a terrestrial vehicle, what is clear is that this mode is made for straight-line speed. The gentle, shallow slope at the nose and the high front fenders with those painted navy speed lines are very aggressive, giving the aura of a cerulean cheetah on the chase. The very tip of his nose is covered in a pewter blue that I don't believe is found anywhere else on the figure in either mode, when the navy found elsewhere would have been sufficient. Really, 3 different shades of blue is a little much considering there's hardly any other color on him in this mode. I know that Studio Series' whole modus operandi is slavish accuracy, but would anyone honestly have cared if some of the white from Robot Mode was allowed to bleed into the hover car as an accent color? The most we get here is on the windshield, or rather underneath its translucent exterior. BLURR's hover car mode is an open seater sporting luscious blue leather upholstery, making for a more convincing interior than that of Titans Return, and that one could actually house something. Presumably, BLURR is a rear-engined hover car, as much of his bulk is found back here. The bodywork is primarily navy, with what I assume to be radiators painted a brighter blue to match the rest. Twin rocket nozzles, a staple of BLURR's design as far as I know, are found at the very rear, implying the ludicrous speeds he's capable of. Overall, the proportions found on Studio Series BLURR are my absolute favorite out of every iteration of this design. With the front focused on aerodynamics and the rear focused on power, BLURR easily comes across as a natural progression of our own modern open-seater race cars. He definitely looks more sporty than the Titans Return mold, whose own height and narrowness compared to Studio Series makes him more akin to a proper rocket car than something more practical. I would imagine BLURR would like to take a corner every once in a while, right? Well, even if Titans Return BLURR is indeed a rocket car, it would still be easier for him, as he actually has wheels. Studio Series BLURR does not. I don't really understand why he doesn't have even some tiny casters as any other BLURR would. It just seems like a sacrifice for no discernible gain. If it was for the sake of his engineering, we'll soon see that a more complex figure isn't necessarily a better one. I will admit that making a small platform for the rest of the figure to sit upon and seem as if it truly is hovering is pretty cool, even if the final execution was more than a little messy. All of this scathing criticism does seem a little hollow, knowing that most people, including myself, will keep this guy on a shelf in robot mode for the next 10 years, or however long it takes for another Deluxe BLURR to come out. Oh, he doesn't have wheels? Who cares? Not you. Not really. Not enough. Or maybe I'm wrong, considering I can still easily find him on shelves 4 waves and a year and some change later. It turns out that the Titans Return figure was so successful in its transformation that Hasbro felt it was good enough to use as a baseline for Studio Series' take on the Blue Bullet. As such, if you've experienced the former mold, this scheme will be very familiar. This is just Titans Return BLURR, but more. To be honest, I'm not even certain which version does a better job, as both iterations have their merits and their own trade-offs. The Studio Series figure is more complex for the sake of a robot mode with a bulkier torso, and this is achieved through the use of some hinged panels that you have to be certain are out of the way of the shoulder's armatures, which can be somewhat annoying. Those arms insist on using the entire length of the hovercar's side skirts, resulting in some egregious kibble on the arms and, conversely, very clean legs. Funnily but unsurprisingly, this scheme proves that the use of a Titan Master on the previous release was inconsequential. And since there's no need for a real cockpit, it closes up nicely to form a solid torso. The way the windshield spins around is a nice touch. Now let's see what all this borrowing and iterating has gotten us. I'd say Blur's robot mode is 2 parts swank and 1 part funk. He certainly is stylish, showing off many of those clean curves that most movie-era designs share. His proportions hit the nail on the head thanks to a great use of his vehicle mode's mass, for the most part. We'll get to it. Blur's legs are astonishingly clean, and might just be the most aesthetically pleasing part of any figure that's come out in the past 3 years, though it's not like I'm keeping track. I've mentioned time and time again that I love it when a robot's lower legs flare out in this particular way, and Blur's do so to an unbelievably swank degree. It also helps that they get a copious helping of the white that's been missing until now. And then there's the ankle tilt, the cleanest I've ever seen on a deluxe. The way it's built into the boot is just so aesthetically pleasing, far superior to most War for Cybertron era ankle tilts, which create massive gaps between the foot and the shin as if it's been busted open. The sides of his legs are completely devoid of kibble, unlike the Titan's Return figure, who decided to spread the vehicle mode kibble more evenly across the robot mode. Let's see what the consequences of that were. Yeah, these wizard sleeves are kind of egregious, aren't they? Keeping his arm perfectly straight, they run all the way up to his shoulder. I could probably live with them if it weren't for 2 major design oversights. First, they don't lock in. There's a space on the inside of his forearm that this tab is meant to seat inside, but the lack of a 4th wall in this channel just forces the tab back out. Second, the hinge is attached to the wrist swivel. This means that if you want Blur to shake his fist, the sleeve is coming with it. The last point of contention here is Blur's head sculpt. It has all the right details, but it just looks off. His face is too pinched, his cheekbones too pronounced, his jeans too perfect. He's also stuck with this dismally dark light piping that looks dead under most lighting conditions. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't work here. I'm kind of confused why Hasbro decided to bring back light piping now of all times when hardly any other figures out at the time had it. I'm not complaining, I'll never complain about light piping. It's just weird that Blur and, as we'll soon see, Cup have it when no one else does. And they both suck at it. Blur's rifle is cast in the same assumedly unpaintable white plastic as his hands and feet, and it's pretty nicely detailed. It's blanched enough that all of the ridges and divots cast shadows quite readily, but has this weird texture that's akin to a slightly stronger version of those fake ninja swords I used to get at parades as a kid. It stores underneath the nose in vehicle mode and sticks out quite far, conspicuously so. Blur's only other accessory is a very blunt welding torch made of the same stuff as the rifle. It covers the hand completely so as to appear as if it's replaced it, which I dig. It can also store in vehicle mode alongside the firearm, and it tucks away much more cleanly. In fact, by itself, one can pretend it's some kind of large boxy intake or something. It happily stores in the same place in robot mode and doesn't even make the backpack protrude very far. I could have done without the welder, but both accessories are inoffensive enough. Blur has anywhere between 20 and 24 dedicated points of articulation, depending on whether or not you count either the hampered wrist swivels or the transformation toe joints. As such, Blur poses well enough. His arms look increasingly more ridiculous the farther away from his torso they are thanks to those massive and flimsy sleeves. He has other oddities too, such as his head, whose ball joint is cupped by the torso at the base of the neck, his faux ratcheted shoulders, and the forward hip joints, which more often than not want to move in tandem. His knees don't bend very far, but I think the wonderfully clean ankle pivots more than make up for it. Something I alluded to earlier are some transformation joints that act as a sort of toe joint if you think it looks good enough. It can support his weight easily thanks to some much stronger faux ratchets. As far as a mainline figure goes, BLURR's articulation hits all the right notes, but doesn't do much more than that. While I don't like Studio Series BLURR as much as I do the Titans Return figure, I seem to enjoy him more than most. Those sleeves are egregious, yes, and they are a major sour point on an otherwise sweet figure. Disregarding that, Studio Series BLURR has a ton of style and is a pretty nice side grade. If you've never experienced the prior mold, I would definitely say you'll be fine opting for this one. Even in 2022, he is still readily available at most stores. If Legends BLURR is a viable option for you and you're really leaning towards it, I don't think there's much of anything this figure can do to convince you otherwise. Really, it's all down to personal taste, and I think Studio Series BLURR tastes pretty adequate. If you liked this video or otherwise found it helpful or informative, then please subscribe for more reviews like this in the future, and feel free to suggest topics for future reviews in the comments. When we return, we'll be rounding off the debut of Studio Series 86 with an old tale from an old timer. This has been Kit Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.